Thanks for tuning in to more NFL Draft Talk on the Ourlads Football Network as we go inside the Kansas City Chiefs. As the Kansas City Chiefs, fresh off of another AFC championship, this time not able to complete the deal with the Super Bowl championship. So, like the other 31 teams, it's about rebuilding in a certain kind of way, because the Chiefs are not that far off from getting back to the Super Bowl, of course, and winning another Super Bowl championship. But there is more work to be done, and that is the reason why, as always, whenever we want to talk Kansas City Chiefs football, we welcome Thomas Welte to the program, and he covers the Kansas City Chiefs for OurheadAddict.com. Thomas, good to talk to you again.
Yeah, great to be here. Starting off the show, bringing up the Super Bowl loss, but still hard to talk about. But yeah, excited for a new season and a chance for redemption.
Yeah, and it's interesting because this is it's perfect timing that we're doing this too, because the Chiefs are one of the teams I'm assigned to with the Ourlads draft publications, and so I was actually pretty happy about some of the things that I talked about in the draft preview guide, and you helped me with that. Mm-hmm. And so thinking about the beginning of what I'm going to talk about, and definitely the main topic has got to be offensively, all about the offensive line, and really for the team in general. It would have been perfect if Humphrey would have been the first pick. Then I could have just started off that way. But he's right there, the next pick. And it really has been all about the offensive line, hasn't it? There's 15 players, I believe I heard, that are now competing for 5 starts on the team. Yeah. And really it all did start with the trade, though, before the draft. Of course, there was all the free agent activity and such, but the big trade for Orlando Brown started it all.
Yeah, so that was it was an interesting move. I know that the Chiefs had been, reportedly interested in Trent Williams early in free agency, and then when that didn't work out, even before that didn't work out, I kind of put out the idea and was among a couple of other people who follow the Chiefs who said, "Hey, don't be surprised if the Chiefs are talking to the Ravens." I looked at the when Andy Reid was in Philadelphia and he traded for Jason Peters from the Bills. Andy Reid. It's interesting. Again, they've got so many new faces, but one of the things that seems to be, he wants to make sure that he's got veterans at those important spots, and I think that's why the interest in Trent Williams was so high. And I think that Orlando Brown is a solid backup plan for that. Not on the same level as Trent Williams, but I think that he was a better left tackle than anything you're probably going to find that late in the first round, anyways.
Yes.
So I thought it was a great move. I was excited for it. Like I said, I think we even talked about that on that
we did.
show before the draft. I was very excited when it finally broke. Some of my some of the guys that I talked Chiefs with were blowing up my phone that day, and
that's because you predicted it.
So yeah, it was a big deal, and it's 15 guys just across the line. There's so many new faces in that building, and it's a new style of offensive line. In previous years, the Chiefs have kind of favored the smaller, more agile kind of zone blocking guys.
Okay.
And one of the themes is that's, with these new additions, you've got, a lot bulkier offensive line. So just based on projecting the starters from this year to last year, the weight of the offensive line on average would go up about 10 pounds.
Wow.
So it's going to be a bigger line and hopefully more powerful.
Well, I mean, the competition, and look, we'll talk more about this. It's almost mid-June, so we'll probably have you on again at some point in the next couple of months during training camp. But beforehand, everybody's going to talk about competition because, well, first of all, on the left side, you're entrenched with Brown and Tooney. So that's left guard, left tackle. But center, you're going to have Humphrey go up against Blythe. Right guard, you have Duvernay Tardif with Long, who just got injured, Wiley and Smith, the rookie, and right tackle, Niang against Remmers. So there's some really good competition at the 3 other spots. And I'm assuming that if Blythe loses the job, or if both players are just too good to not start, that Humphrey more than likely starts at center, and maybe Blythe moves to right guard. could
That's a
happen.
tough one. Yeah, I think from everything I've seen, Humphrey is running with the ones and the OTAs and the voluntary camps. So again, still early,
Yes.
but the team seems very high on him, and he just in terms of the fit makes a lot of sense coming from a kind of a similar offense in Oklahoma.
Yep.
And one of the things that the coaches have talked about is just how high they are on his football IQ and his ability to call adjustments and call protections. So they seem very confident in him, even for a rookie. I think Blythe he can play guard. He's going to have some flexibility. I just based on the deal. I mean, it was a very, I think it's close to just $1 million. It was a smaller deal, so I think they're okay if he's a backup guy, kind of a swing, guard
Sure.
tackle as
Yeah.
needed. Um, the right guard spot will be interesting with Wiley, who is the starter a good portion of last year and has been a starter on that offensive line. Duvernay Tardif is coming back after opting out, and what he did during the COVID year was very commendable and was awesome. But it's one of those it's a kind of a double-edged sword because it's like is he going to come back and lose his job after doing this wonderful awesome thing?
Interesting.
But
Yeah.
when he was playing, he was a good player, and so
Is he
we'll
the
see what
favorite
that's
right
like.
now?
What was that?
Is he the favorite with Long's
That's
injury?
tough. I think. Well,
Because it's
he hasn't been
interesting.
at
You
the.
hear these things about Long. He gets hurt, and
Mhm.
already I'm hearing things about, well, but it's potentially he should be ready to go week one. Like if all of a sudden, you're just going to hand the starting job to him week
Yeah.
one when the guy hasn't played in 2 years and got hurt
Yeah.
after like a couple of days of practice.
Yeah. I've said. It wouldn't be surprising to me, even though Kyle Long was kind of a big name addition. It wouldn't be surprising if he ended up because I mean at some point you can't carry four right guards on the
Yeah, that's
roster,
true. Yeah.
and it would not be surprising if at the end of training camp and as they're going into the season if he's not able to go, either releasing him with an injury settlement or even if he starts the season on the physically unable to perform list. There may be some options there, but
Yeah.
yeah, I agree with you. It's hard to say, hey, this guy hasn't played football in 2 years. And even when they were going through camps, Andy said that he was the one who had the most rust, which again, that's not unexpected. But I mean, and he's a great dude, or you root for him and you hope it works out, but you got to be realistic and so same thing with Duvernay Tardif. We haven't seen him yet. He hasn't been. He'll be here for the mandatory camps this
Yep.
upcoming weeks. But the guy that, and I'm sure we'll talk about him in here in a little bit, but Trey Smith has been. I mean, Andy Heck, the offensive line coach, is reportedly just giddy. Excuse me, giddy with Trey Smith's progress and the way that he plays. He says that he raves about his ability to finish and really be a guy who just goes out and plays with a nasty streak. So that's exciting to hear for Kansas City fans. I know that Trey Smith was a guy that a lot of people were excited about to get where they got him. And so maybe not week one, but it wouldn't surprise me if by the end of the season that Trey Smith was a starter.
Oh yeah. I mean, look, that's the one thing that we did have to talk about because when you see a guy that has a third round grade, and not Ourlads wasn't the only publication that felt he was a third round guy. And speaking of Ourlads, we obviously want to remind everybody that even though it's after the draft, here's the Ourlads draft guide. So this is still a perfect time to order the guide because now you know exactly where every player fits with all 32 teams, including some undrafted rookies that were signed that we'll talk about with the Chiefs that are profiled in the guide as well. And then the draft review guide that I'm working on right now for the Chiefs. That's why I was mentioning before, it's a perfect time that we're talking because I'm actually working on the Chiefs report today. So here we are. This is last year's draft review guide available now at ourlads.com. So the 2021 edition will be out in about a few weeks. So yeah, third round grade. I know my counterpart, co-host of the Jet Show, Jan Levine, was really upset that the Jets didn't pick him up because he was available so late. I'm assuming there's a lot of football fans around the country that were upset that they weren't the beneficiary of a player like this late in the draft. So I don't think it's the blood clots because he came back and did so well after that. He was a 5-star recruit. Without the blood clots, he's a first-round draft pick. It's not even close. Why did this guy last so long?
Man, that's one that like I'm not complaining about it because he landed on
Oh
my team.
yeah,
But
I wouldn't either.
yeah, I think so. I agree with you. I think the blood clots are a serious concern, and in a normal year would have been a big deal. One of the things that seems to have been, um, again, it changes from team to team, but one of the things that may have contributed to that was not having an in-person combine, not having in-person medicals. A lot of times, even
Good
leading up to the
point.
draft, there were reports of teams, and it seemed that there was kind of some frustration on some teams' parts about not being able to have their medical staff examine players. And so I think when you talk about blood clots and an issue like that, that is probably something that you want to check out in person. And Andy Reid talked about that when during the introductory press conferences after the draft, and how their medical staff had reached out to the Tennessee medical staff and they felt good about the research and the plan that they had for him. The other thing I'll say about Trey Smith is, with as good as he is, he does have some moments where, it's just like maybe a little overly aggressive and a little, and these are kind of nitpicky on
Sure.
film, but maybe I noticed a couple times where he just kind of gets a little lungy, and maybe his and it all seems to me to be just a desire to be that aggressive finisher. One of the things that, as I was going back and just doing research on him post draft, I didn't know this, that his practice schedule was so limited after the blood clots, where he was only practicing 2 or 3 days a week,
Okay.
in full contact. And so when you talk about his development as an offensive lineman, and you're going, okay, he looks like he might be a little bit behind from where we expected him to be. Well, yeah, he hasn't had a chance to practice as much as the other guys. And football's, you got to get those live reps.
That's
And
right.
so I'm not sure. It sounds like he's been, a full go in every practice in Kansas City, and they seem to have a good plan. And so it sounds like he's healthy and ready to operate. And so there's definitely potential for that to be a really big steal for Kansas City.
Yeah, and again, it's really just, it does look like it's all about just, yeah, he checks out okay health wise, and I agree too, based on just double checking again, because I was putting my report together, that Andy Heck did seem to feel like, I mean, the wording he was using seemed to
Mm-hmm.
indicate that, yes, this is a kid with a ton of talent, really like him, but he's not ready yet. That it's
Mm-hmm.
going to take. That's why, as you mentioned, maybe by the end of the year. So, it's about picking up the system. It's the pros, like you
Mm-hmm.
said. Maybe when you're only out there a couple of days a week on the field in college, that could bring you back a little bit. So, yeah, it may not be week one, but at some point, maybe the beginning of 2022, the least, the
Mm-hmm.
longest, that he'll be the starting starting right guard for the team, maybe for many years.
Yeah, I don't think so. The four guards you mentioned, I don't think any of them are on the roster except for Trey Smith starting next year. So
Oh, okay, that's right. Interesting. Okay, and then you've got Humphrey and Smith, along with Tooney and Brown, and you're pretty set.
yeah.
Especially if Niang winds up winning the job, because
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to believe that the Chiefs brass just absolutely wants Niang to win that job desperately, because
Yeah.
Remmers is definitely more of a player, a veteran guy that you probably just would prefer as on the
Mm-hmm.
bench. He could definitely fill a few roles if he need be.
Mm-hmm.
But if that kid were to work out, now all of a sudden you're looking at 2022 for 2 or 3 years of potentially having your offensive line set.
Yeah. I mean, and Tooney would be the oldest guy on the line. I think at 28, 29 years old, um, and everything that's even before all the trades and stuff were made. Pretty much, as the second that Mitchell Schwartz was released, it was, the focus became Lucas Niang and his future, and how much confidence they have in him, and it wasn't a coincidence that at kind of at the same time there were like more and more videos of him training coming out from his trainer and his agent, and then just a lot of positive conversations. I think the early reports are that Remmers is continuing to get those first team reps, but it's definitely an open competition. Like you said, Mike Remmers is, man, he's got to have some of the worst luck just for an offensive tackle. Last year he started, and he actually played better than what most people think at right tackle, and then in the Super Bowl gets forced over to left and just in a really tough matchup. And in terms of a backup lineman, he's actually pretty good. If he's your swing tackle and you need it, he has to play a game or two, you can figure that out. But yeah, not a guy you want necessarily starting. If he has to hold down the right side, I think they can survive with that.
Yeah.
They did it for most of last year. So again, he's serviceable, but they'd definitely be excited if Niang stepped up and was able to secure that starting right tackle spot, because then you have a very large, very young, offensive line, and that gives them time to gel as a unit. Those years together and consistency on the offensive line, just knowing the guys that you're playing next to is really important.
Yeah, and I tell you, I think there's a possibility that if a lot of these young kids work out, that the Chiefs team this year on paper could be better than the teams that went to the Super Bowl the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Possible.
Yeah.
Because the talent's there. Okay, let's stick on offense with the only other actually two other players that were drafted offensively out of the six, both receivers. Noah Gray, the tight end, and Cornell Powell, the wide receiver. And I know we had talked a couple of times, and I've mentioned this being again the Chiefs, I guess you could say, contributor on Ourlads for a few years. That when were they going to find a competent number 2 tight end in case anything happens to Travis Kelce, because he's such a big important part of the team if he were to get injured.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw that a couple of years ago. It's just a big drop off. Well, it looks like they might have found that guy. And when we say a fill-in, a backup, we're not trying to talk about he's another Travis Kelce. We're just trying to say, hey, there's a guy that can go in there and represent. And Noah Gray seems like a perfect fit.
Yeah, he's actually been one of the guys that has popped out just early on in camps. He's actually climbed the depth chart above Blake Bell and Nick Keiser, who, Blake Bell spent a year with the Cowboys, but he was on that Super Bowl winning team. And Nick Keiser was on the team the last 2 years, I believe. So those are guys who have been on the team, who have experience, who are familiar with the system, who are losing reps to this rookie tight end. So I think the team's very high on him. I think they see it similarly. They need to be able to not just, in the case of an injury, but also to lighten that load on Travis a little bit. He's
absolutely
he's aging like fine wine, but he is still aging, and Father Time is undefeated. But giving another, just element of that passing attack that the defense has to at least consider, because in the past couple of years, the second tight end has not been a very consistent or very considerable threat for the Chiefs.
Yeah. Yep. So that worked out really well, or at least it appears like it's going to work out really well. And then there's Powell, and again, it's interesting because in the draft preview guide, I should say, I specifically said for the wide receivers, I only had 3 lines it was like the smallest of information that I put together out of any position for the Chiefs. I said, with Sammy Watkins gone, the team should add another receiver to the mix, including, most of all, a player with good size and physicality.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what they got with Cornell. That fits him almost to a T. Now, he's not, 6'5", but he's got a really strong frame.
Mm-hmm.
And you even hear Patrick Mahomes saying it. I mean, this guy will go into the contested areas and come down with the ball. He's got outstanding balance, which helps him because he's a very good yak player. So to get a guy like this that had a breakout season at one of the top college football programs for the last several years, he was on that team for just about the entire run and finally had his opportunity this past year. He's the perfect sleeper pick.
Yeah, so he's definitely got a lot of excitement just from the Chiefs fans, and I tell people we got to manage expectations a little bit just because he is a rookie and he's coming in. He did play with Trevor Lawrence. He played in a really effective offense. My biggest concern with him is just how well he will separate in the NFL, and that's. I would never call him slow or anything like that, but compared to some of the NFL athletes, he may have to work a little harder. But even for a big guy, his route running is pretty solid. I was impressed with what I saw, on tape, and I think that again with that physical profile, he's just gonna have to learn to use it against NFL size and NFL speed, and um, man, there really isn't a lot of. I mean, there is competition, but in terms of the investment in the profile from the Chiefs, I mean, it's for that kind of outside X receiver type, that bigger body type. It's going to be Powell, Demarcus Robinson, who, even though he's been here for a while, and some people know his name because he usually has like one big game a year, and then he just kind of disappears, and
Yeah.
he's maddeningly, inconsistent. And then
Yeah, when you're looking for those fantasy players, and then Robinson will have that big week, and you go, "Ooh, I got my pickups this week. Is this the week do I take Robinson?
yeah,
Is he going to have one of those?" And then he just never really.
yep, he never strings it all together. But and
But
then
he's
you have
valuable.
you have Byron Pringle, who's an undrafted free agent who's been on the team for a while, and he played. Him and Demarcus pretty much split those outside reps last year when Sammy was hurt, and so I think that there's a good chance that Powell at least finds himself in that rotation, and if he can develop that chemistry with Patrick and just be a sponge and learn the game at the pro level, I think the physical profile is there, and like you said, he was stuck behind some really good receivers at Clemson, and so he may be that sleeper who develops into we may be talking a couple weeks from now and people are going, who's this Powell kid and why is he so good? How did he get so far down in the draft?
Sure, absolutely. And by the way, speaking of Pringle, because and this is something we also talked about, is that we know the Chiefs are going to want to, as dangerous as Hardman is in the return game, he's becoming too valuable now to throw in there in the return game as much. So they would more than likely be looking for a full-time successor. I was looking at the draft picks and so forth, and the free agent moves. Would you think that right now, Mike Hughes and Jerick McKinnon, would they be right there in the mix as potential full-time kick returners, or is Pringle the guy?
I think
if it's not going to be Hardman.
Yeah, I think for kick returning, they really liked what Pringle did towards the end of the year. I mean, he was getting snaps over Hardman towards the end of the year, and he actually had a big kickoff return. I'm trying to remember which game that was, but yeah, he is a really good, solid. He's one of those guys that is kind of underrated, bottom of the roster guy, but plays special teams, can come in, make catches, make plays on the field. Here and there.
He would have led the league in kick return yardage had he qualified last year.
Yeah. So I think they're going to lean on him for kick returning duties, and then punt returning is kind of a different beast. I don't think they've had him back there to return punts, but I know that was a struggle for McCole Hardman last year, and I think that they do need him to focus on developing as a receiver. So that's where I think maybe a guy like Mike Hughes might take some reps at the punt returning, and maybe, I don't know, I'm not too familiar with McKinnon's background in terms of punt returning, but I think that's Pringle's probably the guy for kick returning, and they'll have a competition, I'm sure, in camp and work all that out. But I think he's got to be the favorite.
And that's going to be interesting too, because anytime you have a player that is sort of like an Andre Roberts, Jamal Agnew, a guy that really doesn't contribute outside of the return game, you have to hold spot for him. And you have to know that you do have a spot for a guy like that. So, but if he's that dangerous, and usually those spots are only left for guys that are really the elite. And again, so far his numbers show that he could be that type of guy.
Yeah.
All right, let's go with the top pick now, because there were 2 players on defense out of the 6 that the team drafted, including their top pick, Nick Bolton. And one of the other things that we talked about and I wrote about in the draft preview guide was the fact that emphasized the issues that the Chiefs were having last year, red zone defense, that kind of thing. And I know there's a lot of other numbers about how often and all that, and maybe it wasn't as bad as maybe it looked, but it still is an issue. And anytime you're trying to be, you go from a good defense to an elite defense, you try to you try to fix the warts, and that's part of it. And I felt, and we talked about this, that if they were going to improve upon that they would have to look for some better pass coverage players, especially at linebacker, because that's kind of the area when you're dealing with the red zone. And Nick Bolton kind of fits that to me perfectly because he excelled as a zone pass coverage player at Missouri. He had 15 pass breakups over his career. He had a pick six. He's also capable of blitzing. He's got some physical presence to him. He's a team captain. So there's a lot to like about Bolton. And on this team, you get the feeling he's going to play a lot at linebacker.
Yeah, I had to actually talk myself into the Bolton pick a little bit to liking it. I had to go back and do a lot. I wasn't linebacker. It was a little bit of a surprise for me. Linebacker wasn't. I figured that would be a position.
Yeah.
Yeah, I figured that was a position they were going to address next year. With they just drafted Willie Gay last year in the second before Nick Bolton, and they've got Anthony Hitchens, who they really like. They did lose Damian Wilson, the linebacker, not the. You have Damian Williams, who's a running back. I always get those guys mixed up. But yeah, Damian Wilson, the linebacker. See, I did it to myself there.
Yeah, those guys were together, Hitchens and Wilson, for what, like 4 years between the Cowboys and Chiefs?
Yeah. So there's some chemistry there. I think,
Well, that chemistry that's gone now.
Yeah, off the top, I think that you're going to see Bolton get those base down. When there's three linebackers on the field, he'll play one of those outside spots. But from everything that the coaching staff has talked about, they really love his instincts. They love his football IQ and his potential to be the guy who calls the defense down the road. Anthony Hitchens has a big contract, and the Chiefs are going to have a little bit of a squeeze in the next 2 years. So it's possible that he plays this year outside and maybe get some inside reps on some sub packages. But then next year the Chiefs move on from Anthony Hitchens, and Nick Bolton will be the starting Mike with Willie Gay playing the other outside spot and the sub spot. So that's
a good plan.
Yeah, I think that's kind of just if you're looking for the forecast, I think that's where they're hoping things trend. As far as Nick Bolton goes, he really is a guy who his testing numbers were not great, but you also turn on the film and you see a completely different player than just the raw numbers of like the 40 time and stuff.
Yeah.
He's very instinctual. Just the way he lined up Missouri's defense, and so often it felt like he was moving where the play was going before, even sometimes before the ball was snapped. He's like, you look up and he's standing in the gap where the running back's going to go. You can tell that he's a guy who studies the game and really plays with a lot of energy. That was the big takeaway I had, was that he was an energy giver. He's the guy who's going to come downhill and lay a big hit and fire up a defense, and that's always needed. That momentum, that spark of a big play like that can go a long way to, like you said, making a good defense great.
And you better have the hustle, and you better have all those other intangibles, instincts, like you mentioned, when you're 6 feet tall, and you don't have all the other measurables that you're looking for on pro day or at the combine, which we didn't have this year. So then in the fourth round came a player by the name of Joshua Kando, or Kando. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. I don't know if this has been talked about. Again, like I said, I'm going over my stuff, and I was like, you know what? This guy, this going over the profile, and I was just, this guy reminds me of something. And then I was like, you know what? And I looked, and then I looked over that player's profile, and I was like, yeah. And then, he even sounds like him. And that is Taino Passanio.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he reminds me of.
Yeah.
And I don't know, again, if that's been talked about, the similarities, because this guy's 6'6", 260. He's got that like freakish kind of look to him athletically.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, I'm not comparing them production-wise in college, because the production of Passanio was better, but Kando with only 8 sacks in 4 years for a guy that was a 5-star recruit that looks just the part, I think would be concerning to me. But he didn't go high. He was a 4th-round pick. This is kind of the area where you roll the dice. Passanio was a 2nd-rounder. That's different.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way I see this, is kind of a roll of the dice upside type pick.
Yeah. So the Chiefs definitely have a need at defensive end, and even with the Kando pick, like you said, it's a roll of the dice. It's you're looking at the physical profile of a guy who was a really highly rated athlete coming out of high school, who had a pretty good, I believe this is either his redshirt freshman year, but one of his early seasons in Florida State was really good, and then he just got derailed by injuries. And so the medical's got to check out. and then you just got to come in with a plan to help him develop. I thought that in terms of, having some bend and some burst and stuff like that, he was really good. I thought the one of the things I noted was that just that he had, it said soft hands, which I don't mean like they feel soft, but when he got a hold of a lineman, it didn't feel like he had a lot of punch, and so you kind of wonder about the functional strength there
Yeah, you
and how
want
much
soft
he could
hands on
improve.
offense, not defense.
Yeah, you want sledgehammers on defense,
Yeah.
and so that was, it felt like he went around guys, and I wasn't sure there's not a whole lot of power rush, which again is kind of different for Steve Spagnuolo. He's always kind of favored those strength based players who can hold the edge and then make a play,
Hmm.
based on kind of getting those cleanup coverage sacks. But
Okay.
the physical profile is really interesting. Again, it's just going to come down to how they develop him, how they, and he'll be a rotational player, and they'll get him some reps, coming off the bench. But it's been quiet on his front so far through training camp. I mean, it's hard to evaluate defense in camp, anyways.
At
But
least for now. Yeah,
yeah,
we
for
got
now,
another month before training camp starts. So
yeah. So it's been you're optimistic. You want to be optimistic. Last year, Pastino had a really, really bad year. He just wasn't effective, and I don't know. Again, one of those guys that physically the profile had always been there, and they'd always been banking on that. And you were hoping that last year would be his. It was a contract year, and you were hoping that he would get a, kind of a boost from that, and that he would make that leap, and he just didn't. I mean, it was he was he was towards the bottom of the league in terms of, a guy that was losing to single team or to one-on-one matchups. He didn't get double teamed often. He's usually one guy, and he rarely beat that guy. So it was a
that's why
rough
he's
year
in New
for him
Orleans
last year.
now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Don't tell the Saints fans. They might be optimistic still.
Yeah, that's you never know. Sometimes you change the scenery, lightning in a bottle. Who knows?
Hmm.
Likely not, but everybody deserves a second chance, and hopefully, for this kid, Kando, hopefully, his first chance all he'll need. Okay, let's talk about the undrafted signings. There's three key guys that they signed. Bouchel was the quarterback from SMU that they signed. He was more of a seventh round at best, so it wasn't like somebody. It's not a surprise that he was available after the draft. Look, there are a lot of issues, which is the reason why he was available as a pro quarterback. He was a very exciting college quarterback, system guy, all that stuff, excellent timing, accuracy, and all of that. And you see that in college,
Hmm.
especially with the big time offenses. But there's just a limitation as far as his arm and athleticism and so forth. But who knows? Maybe is this a competition between Gordon and Buechel for the number 3 job? And then hopefully at some point, real soon, maybe in a year,
Hmm.
they can impress enough to be the backup.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that, before, I mean, early in Andy Reid's career, he was known for developing those backup quarterbacks and sometimes trading them for, um, more than they were worth. But yeah, that he hasn't really found that guy in Kansas City. He's always valued that backup position. Even when they had Alex Smith, one of the moves they did was to bring in Nick Foles, and they brought in Chad Henne pretty quickly. And part of that is they really value the football IQ of things, the way that those conversations are held in the quarterback room. So I think that he's probably got. That's going to be a big part of it. Is how can he handle those conversations? How can he handle the film breakdown? They've had a couple of those younger guys kind of turning over at the bottom of the roster the last couple of years, and none of them have really stuck at that number 3 spot. So it would. I mean, Chad Henne is kind of the guy, and he's got a really good relationship with Patrick Mahomes, but he's also got to be close. I mean, he may be happy sitting, on the bench and making a couple $1 million a
At this
year.
stage, yeah,
Yeah, although he did make a big play in the playoffs last
he
year.
did.
Sorry,
He
Cleveland.
did.
Um, so again, that's maybe if he retires, but I think that he's firmly entrenched there, that number 2 spot, probably
Yeah.
for as long as he wants to be around. And then, I mean, I think, Shane Bouchel's got just as good of a chance to stick as any of the other younger guys that that they've brought in. I think the athletic limitations or the arm limitations. I mean, Andy Reid worked with Alex Smith for years,
That's
and
true. Yeah.
some other guys who had similar stuff. Andy values the football IQ and the timing and being
That's
able
right.
to you don't have to be the fastest guy, but a little bit of mobility, to avoid sacks and stuff and be creative. So
I think he's a better talent than Gordon.
yeah.
As far as a he'll stick in the league maybe as a backup guy for his career. I could see
hmm
Buechele. I give him more of a shot.
Yeah, I agree. I think that he's got a solid shot. Definitely, there's a little bit more. If I remember right, he was one of the first signings they made. I think they've got a little bit more commitment to him,
Okay.
and I think he's if. Yeah, I don't worry too much about the quarterback position, but
I wouldn't
if I
think
remember right,
so.
he's the guy who's getting the reps, during the voluntary camp.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I would say that he's if the number three quarterback's on the roster, it's probably him.
Okay. And then the other two players that they signed that to note were on defense. It's interesting because Herring, the defensive end for Georgia, actually rated higher on Ourlads than Kando,
hmm
slightly higher in the draft guide. So that's good news for Chief fans for Herring, because
hmm
Herring was you didn't have to use up a draft pick and so forth. Herring was probably available as a fifth round grade, just because of the fact that he didn't get an opportunity to play a lot. There was just a deep rotation at Georgia,
hmm
interchangeable guys. I saw a lot of these guys from Georgia the last couple of years come out. Same guys. You just don't know whether or not they'll take that
hmm
part-time status and actually make a move. But not a bad idea to bring in a guy like that with that type of talent who has the ability to, play multiple roles for your team.
Yeah, no, I think there's some reason to be optimistic about Herring in the future. He might be a guy who, if I remember right, he's recovering from I think an ACL tear, or some type of injury, and so we'll
Okay.
see if he's ready to roll by the time the season starts. He may be a guy who kind of gets a red shirt on the IR list, but yeah, he's in that mold of kind of that bigger power rush kind of guy that Steve Spagnuolo kind of favors. He and like you said, part-time production, but when he did play, he looked solid. He looked disciplined. Yeah, comparing him to Kando, I think that he was again a much better player in terms of the power in his hands and setting the edge and making some of those reads that you need from your base defensive end. So I'm excited about what he could be. Again, for an undrafted guy, I think it's a pretty good pickup, and we'll see. We'll see how far he gets. Like I said, I don't expect to see much from him year one, but starting year 2 or 3, I think he could definitely be a guy who sticks and makes it into the rotation.
Yeah, and a guy like that, especially if he looks good during preseason games and other scouts get an opportunity to look at him, that's a guy that you might want to keep on your team, even though I know you can protect. I don't know what the actual new rules are with the practice squad, but
hmm
I know that you can now protect a few guys compared to before. Riley Cole, the
hmm
linebacker from South Alabama, is the final of the three guys to talk about the signings. The sixth round grade for Cole, 3-year starter, played both inside outside, projects as an outside guy, but more than likely, this is a guy who, because he was an excellent special teams performer as well, that's got to be that's his way into the NFL.
Yeah, for sure. Riley Cole he's interesting. The Chiefs actually worked him out in the pre-draft process at fullback. They had him doing some
Oh,
fullback
okay.
drills. Yeah, so which I thought was really interesting. Anthony Sherman retired, and that's one that again as the NFL evolves and continues on, it's like, well, do you have they picked up a fullback from New
Michael
Orleans
Burton.
and
Yeah.
yeah, Michael Burton. And so it's like, well, if you could get a guy who can play, special teams and be your fullback and maybe even an emergency linebacker,
Yeah, right?
that's probably more useful than just having a fullback. So
Yes.
if Cole has a chance to make the team, it's going to be that versatility. That's a lot to put on a rookie. But again, I think that he has the potential to be a really, really good special teams guy. And Dave Tobe is a very experienced special teams coach,
Oh
and
yeah,
he's
one of the
he's got a lot
best.
of influence in Kansas City, and there are some guys some Chiefs fans, shake their fist at. Like, how is he on the roster? Well, that's because he plays special teams better than somebody else.
Yep.
There's a guy named Marcus Kemp who's been around for years, and I'm not sure how many passes he's actually caught, but he plays special teams, and he plays it really well. And his spot is pretty secure on that roster most days. So,
Yep.
yeah. So I think that Riley Cole is probably one of the more fun players to watch, just as preseason unwinds and as we get into training camp and all that. Like, it's going to be interesting to see where they play him, especially during preseason when you're going, second team, third teams, and if he's going to get linebacker snaps or fullback snaps or both, and then to see what kind of contributions he can make on special teams. I think he could be an exciting player. Just in terms of the versatility alone, makes him fun to watch.
Yeah, they're always looking for those stories at training camp to fall back on. The NFL is loaded with them. All right, before I let you go, I just wanted to quickly also talk about a few of the free agents that and some guys that were brought in via trade. We already mentioned Mike Hughes. Things didn't work out for him in Minnesota mainly because of injuries. What's his role going to be?
Well, optimistically, I think that there's going to be a chance for him to compete for the nickel corner spot, that slot corner. Again, if not, he could probably pull back to the dime. It's for him. It's going to be a lot of it's going to be, depending on medicals.
Yeah.
And again, he was a first round draft pick. It's one of those project players that Veach likes to pick up, especially at cornerback, where he just seems to be the island of misfit toys, and somehow it's working.
Yeah. And it's funny because you got the back-to-back 2018 30th pick, which is this guy, Hughes, and then the 2019 30th pick, which is DeAndre Baker. So all you need is one of those two guys to work out.
Yeah, and I think that, again, he's recovering from a pretty nasty leg injury. But I think that when they picked up DeAndre Baker, there was some excitement for that addition. Unusual circumstances that led to him being available, and I'm assuming that they did enough research to be comfortable with that situation. But the limited snaps he got, they were good. But I know that they were interested in him during that draft cycle. I know that they had him in for pre-draft workouts. He fits that very aggressive, very confident press corner mold for what Steve Spagnuolo looks for. And neither of the guys, neither Hughes or Baker, are these elite athletes, which is fine. I mean, that's not Kansas City secondary is not necessarily dependent on a star cornerback.
Sure,
they really value kind of more of those coverage on the from the safety position and just the middle of the field, making sure that you don't get beat, underneath and all that stuff. So. Both those guys have a chance to see some serious snaps. I think Baker's probably an outside guy, and then of course they had L'Jarius Sneed last year who came on and was very impressive, and he can play outside, inside. He's kind of the key to it all, depending on where I know they want to play him outside, from my understanding, but it might be a situation where Baker can only play outside, or they're only comfortable with him outside, and so Sneed plays. He's going to be kind of the Swiss Army knife, I think. And
I'm putting together my. I don't know how I'm going to name it yet, but it's going to be, not only is it going to be for the draft, but I'll probably put it to players that are already in the NFL. That's ready to take like that next jump from like nobody really knows the guy to, hey, here's a potential Pro Bowler, and Sneed's going to be one of those guys. He's going to be one of my guys. I don't know if I'm going to have a top 5 or a top 10, but Sneed's going to be on that list definitely as a guy that I think has the ability to. Nobody really knows who he is, and maybe this is the year that everybody finds out.
Yeah, he was, as a rookie. I'll say that he started for a rookie for Steve Spagnuolo and Andy Reid, and they don't like to start a lot of rookies. And he came in, so last year Bashaud Breeland was facing a suspension, and early, like throughout camp, it was Antonio Hamilton who was getting the reps with the one, and almost by the time week 1 rolled around, L'Jarius Sneed took that job and never looked back. And then he suffered an injury, and Breeland came back, and so then they bring him back, and they're like, well, we don't really have Breeland and Ward are corners, and they played him in the slot. And he goes, I've never played in the slot before. And he did that really well. And I think he ended up with between the end of the season and the playoffs, he ended up with I think a stretch of games where he had 4 sacks or something. Like they started blitzing him, and in one of the interviews, they asked him, so what is your experience? How do you feel about as a blitzer? He goes, I've never blitzed before, so that was fun. So it's kind of crazy that this kid who got moved around when he was in college a little bit is so versatile and so talented, and he's the one guy in their secondary who is. Tyrann Mathieu is an athlete too, but I think if I remember right, he ran like a 4.38.
Oh yeah,
40 time. I mean, he's an athlete and he's got the size, and so he's going to be an exciting player to watch.
Yep. And that'll be also fun to watch, though, the competition with the guys like Baker and Hughes and such.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other guy, well, there's 2 other guys I wanted to talk about. McKinnon, who I already mentioned, his talent. And look, this is going to be his 2nd year after the injuries. He actually played all 16 games last year. So maybe the Chiefs get him in the perfect situation. He's pretty much, as a veteran, he's seen it all by now. He's got a couple more years left, max, especially after injuries, being a running back. He doesn't have a lot of mileage on him, just the injuries. But do you think he ends up, by the end of the year, getting the 2nd most touches of all running backs?
That's a tough one because they really like Darrell Williams, and obviously they've got Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who they
that's going to be
invested.
A question people are going to want to answer for fantasy teams.
Yeah, I would say, gosh, it's so tough. I'm not.
And because McKinnon's got the name recognition, that a lot of people are going to pencil him in as the guy that if anything happens to Helaire, McKinnon's going to be the guy. Even though I could actually see if anything happens to Helaire, Williams would still wind up being the number 1 running back, and McKinnon will be the guy that they could use to do whatever they want to do, especially on 3rd down.
Yeah, Williams has been in the system, and they really like him. I think he's going to benefit a lot from the new offensive line because he's a very linear runner. It's north-south for him.
Okay,
and so I think he's gonna benefit from that a little bit more than maybe Clyde will. I think they'll both be better, but they don't. The thing with Williams is that he really struggles sometimes in the passing game, and the one pass in the Super Bowl that Patrick Mahomes made when he was literally parallel to the earth, in the air. That was, if I remember right, that was Darrell Williams where that pass hit him in the face mask in the end zone.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah, so. If McKinnon can offer some more reliability as a receiver, I think that you can look for him to overtake that, be that 2nd running back. The other part of that, I think, is McKinnon and Helaire are kind of both built similarly. I think McKinnon's a little bit more athletic, but just in terms of that mentorship, I think there's going to be value there for Clyde, and I'd still say bank on Clyde getting those touches, and I know he got hurt last year, but that was kind of a freak thing.
Oh, I agree. I think he's clearly got to be. I haven't even looked at it yet for fantasy, but I have to think he's got to be definitely top 10. Don't you think for running backs?
Yeah, I'd let people sleep on him for a little bit just because he didn't. The expectations last year were high, and he still had over 1,000 yards total, but the injury really slowed him down, and there was a little bit of in the middle of the season where it was just kind of slow and there wasn't a lot of running. And but again, with the new offensive line, I think that they improved their run blocking overall, especially on the inside. That's where Clyde makes his bread and butter is those inside zone runs or those inside gap runs. So yeah, keep him. Don't let last year paint his future too much for you because it's a whole new offensive line.
Yeah, any rookie can't be expected to, no matter what team you're on, to be at the best of your ability. So yeah, I think he's going to do just fine. His best football is definitely in front of him, and the other guy might be the top guy, outside of Tooney, of course, and Brown, who was a trade acquisition. But as far as free agency, that was Jarran Reed. And this might be one of in my mind, I think, especially because of when he was signed, I think this could wind up being the sleeper signing of the offseason. Because not only of how good he is, but the fit. And now he's going to play with Chris Jones alongside of him. to go along, of course, with his old buddy Frank Clark. They were together in Seattle. I mean, that's why I was saying before, I think on paper, this could be the best Kansas City Chief team
Hmm.
that we've seen. And this is part of the reason.
Yeah, the John Reed sighting flew so far under the radar and hasn't. So one of the things that hasn't been talked about, I don't think much in the national media at all. If you're not following Kansas City closely, you probably haven't heard this. But so with the signing of John Reed, the Chiefs are planning to play Chris Jones at defensive end in their base package. Uh,
Oh,
and Steve Spagnuolo has come out and talked about Chris Jones playing defensive end, so that those early downs you're looking at Frank Clark, John Reed, Derek Nottie, Chris Jones, and so Chris Jones has shown up.
okay.
Yeah, a little bit slimmer, and that's something that he's wanted to do. He's wanted to play defensive end, and then on those pass rushing downs, that's when you're going to have Chris Jones, John Reed next to each other, Frank Clark, and then probably you're going to see that combination of Taco Charlton, maybe some Josh Kaindow, and then Mike Dana from last year. So Chris Jones is going to be. I'm trying to remember who they may give him the. I think it was the guys over at the Kansas City Sports Network who said they're giving the J.J. Watt treatment, where they just pick the worst lineman on the other team
There you
and
go.
line Chris Jones across from him
Yeah.
and let him go. So they're really we could have a big year from Chris Jones, and Jerron Reed could really be the one that facilitates that. Obviously, Reed and Clark have had some really good years in Seattle together, so that's exciting. Yeah, that to me has been a big pickup that has just flown under the radar, and people aren't talking about
Yep.
what that means for that defense. And my biggest concern, or one of my bigger concerns, was that defensive end position and putting Chris Jones out there if it works out. And he's athletic enough; he's got the size. And again, he's slimmed down a little bit. It could work out, pretty well for Kansas City. And just being able to have that flexibility up front is going to be huge for them.
Yeah, because that was one of the other things. Matter of fact, the defensive line position, especially at the edge, was my number one need going into the draft for the Chiefs,
Hmm.
and 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 that's kind of, again, we talked a little bit about that too at the bottom of the first round, but it now just the fact that, like you said, Jones gets to kind of move out there, and
Hmm.
that kind of fills that spot, and Reed, it's incredible too, because the other thing we talked about was how much money the team had invested on the defensive line when you took a look at all the other contracts on the team. So Reed comes
Yeah.
in now. I didn't even check it out. What was his contract? It must not have been that expensive.
Is a 1 year deal. I think it's in the $8 or $9 million range.
Okay,
It
that's
wasn't a
manageable.
big deal by
Yeah,
by any means, but he definitely has a chance to earn a longer term deal. Again, that's one of those sneaky positions right now. The Chiefs have a lot of defensive tackles, but Derek Nottie's a free agent. Colin Saunders, who they drafted a couple years ago, hasn't shown much yet, which is maybe a big year for him. And then there's some other guys that are coming off the book, so that he may be a guy that they look to keep around, especially if he can unlock Frank Clark a little bit. That would be worth the investment to keep him around.
that's right. All right, I am now throwing up the website here at Arrowhead Addict, so you can take a little bit of a glimpse here of what's available here. Of course, you got all sorts of things. If you're a big Chiefs fan, you got the draft section, you got history section, uh, which also kind of coincides with the 50 greatest Chiefs. You got the podcast. Talk a little bit about the podcast and when it's available. Do you
Yeah,
know?
so actually, I've not been too involved with their podcast, but yeah, Arrowhead Addict is they've been around for a long time, and they're putting articles out, if not on a daily basis, on pretty close. So right now it's the I said it's the dog days of summer for football fans, where we're just waiting for content and stuff, but they're covering a lot of great things over there. I've been wrapped up with some work stuff, but I'm already digging into the 2022 draft class. So,
Is that
if you
your
guys can,
specialty with the site?
yeah. So I'll venture off and write. I have the freedom to write about other stuff, but my big passion is the draft. So, yeah. So we'll cover some 2022 draft prospects here in the near future. So
Yeah, this talks a little bit about. I see Bashad Breeland's name in here, in a
yeah.
few articles. So, is he going to be missed?
Um, yeah, I mean he was consistent. He was a solid starter. Actually, was like did a lot in the community for the short time he was. I mean, he was there for 2 years. Um, to me, I think it's that move is more about the young guys that they have on the roster and wanting to see what they have, to see if they're going to have to retool that cornerback position like they've done the offensive line this year. It's possible that they may next year you may see a similar aggressive style to change up that secondary with some guys coming off the books and some young guys who need to prove themselves and figure that out. So I know that they had discussions to try to bring him back, but it just didn't work out. He's going to be a good fit for Minnesota. They should, he'll be solid for them. Like, again, um, always held his own and was a good player, really good teammate from everything that as fans we could see. So yeah, he'll be missed.
And I'm just taking a look at the schedule here. So week 1, little rematch with the Cleveland Browns.
Mm-hmm.
That'll kick off the season, and that'll be one of those late games too, on a Sunday. And then the Ravens on a Sunday night. That's a Sunday night game, huh? So it's a kind of tough way to start.
Mm-hmm.
But Chargers and Eagles after that, not bad, and Washington after that. So it's not bad. Giants are on the schedule. Obviously, the division is not as tough as it could be. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just taking a quick glimpse at the schedule, and I think it's very manageable.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, when the schedule came out, one of the observations I made was I think the end of the schedule, they end up, I think, 4 of their last 5 games, or something like that. There's a lot of road games at the end. And so I said, the Chiefs they've been the number 1 seed, I think the last 2 years, and they've had home field advantage. If you're going to lock it up, it's important to lock up when you have some of those away games at the end of the schedule. And then to get that bye week.
Actually, it says here it's 4 of the last 6 games are at home.
Oh, maybe I've got that.
Must have heard it wrong. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or somebody told you it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So that's good.
Yeah. Well, that is good.
That changes things.
Yeah. So playing the first half, and Andy Reid always breaks it down in quarters. So it's the first 4 games, the second 4 games, and it's pretty optimistic that they'll get through the season and hopefully they should be contending for a Super Bowl again.
Well, look, it's about I don't know. I haven't heard exactly how they're doing the whole. How many teams make the playoffs again? They added what?
It's
just 1, right? There's still only 1 extra team.
Yeah. So yep.
So that means that there's still 1 team that gets the bye.
Yep, 1 team that gets the bye.
So that home field, I mean, this schedule tells me that they got a really good chance of securing that first. Look, they're going to be those tough games. The Packers, if Aaron Rodgers is still there.
Yeah.
But Pittsburgh is on the schedule. We just talked and we just mentioned, of course, Cleveland and Baltimore to start the season. But and Tennessee also on the schedule.
Yeah, Tennessee's always plays Kansas City tough.
Yeah. So those are the tough ones. But then, like I mentioned, you do have the Bengals. You got the division. And you get the Giants and Washington. So you get the NFC East, which is not bad to have.
Not a bad poll. Not a bad year to have the NFC East.
Not at all. So, yeah, that's what it looks like. But, we just want to show everybody a little bit of what is available there at FanSided's Arrowhead Addict. And we're going to talk to you again at some point before the season begins, for sure. Since we talked to you so late in the off season after the draft, we'll probably zero in a little bit more into training camp and close to the beginning of the season. But we'll definitely have you on again for sure, unless something big happens, and then we have you on before that. But always appreciate your time, Tom, and. Anything else but you said the draft, so is that the next thing you can actually put something together in the next couple of months to alert to everybody what's going on for next year's draft?
Yeah, so I'm working on. I've already started watching. So I'll play a little spoiler here. I'm looking at wide receivers for the 2022 draft, and there's a lot of guys that I think are really interesting for Kansas City. And so wide receivers and defensive end, those are going to be the start, and then we'll get into cornerbacks. So
When will you
yeah,
have done every position?
oof.
Is that going to be into the season?
Yeah, it'll be a little bit. So I start with the seniors as much as I can. It's yeah, the seniors, kind of the bigger name ones, and work through those. Right now, my daytime job has been have had some extra hours there, so I'm a little behind where I normally like to be. But
Okay.
yeah, no, it's you work through the seniors, the guys that that are going to be there. I can't help myself usually if there's some really exciting underclassmen. I always kind of cheat and jump in and watch some of those guys a little early. But
Sure.
yeah, you try to get the seniors, at least an initial, some initial notes on them, and then as the season goes on, you just try to keep up as best as you can. And it's always interesting to see where people start versus where they end, at the draft cycle.
And it changes so dramatically.
Yeah,
it's
very
incredible.
dramatically.
Yeah.
And
It's
so
fun, but yeah, it's I don't even know what the percentage is, but I bet you if they looked at the percentage of players that were in September that were predicted to be a first round picks, and then actually how it ended up, I bet you it would probably be what, 10%, 15% maybe, that actually stay in the top in the first round.
Yeah, I mean it is. I think a great example is Gregory Rousseau from this last year. Like everyone, like a year ago, everyone was going, all right, he's going to be a top 10 pick, and then he goes to the second round.
That's
it's
right.
the cycle is very interesting, and it's really easy to lose and to gain momentum, really, really quickly. So
and the quarterbacks too.
Yeah.
Those are the ones you have fun with, because you're like, all of a sudden you see a guy that nobody's talking about, and it's like Mac Jones or even Trey Lance. Well, Trey Lance they still talked about, but Mac Jones, like, nobody thought Mac Jones was going to be a first round quarterback. That was not talked about.
Not at all.
No.
So
and all of a sudden it was like, is this guy even going to be drafted like a year and a half ago? So it can go like, and look at the whole Mahomes thing is also just a perfect illustration of how it can change and so forth just so quickly. And the opposite too. A player that might be considered a lock in the top 5 or the first pick, not so lock anymore. I don't even remember. Those guys just don't come around very often. That's why when you talk about guys like Trevor Lawrence, those guys, Peyton Manning, the reason why you talk about those guys don't come around very often is because it doesn't happen very often. When you talk about a quarterback, like, that's going to be the first pick of the draft, and then it actually happens. It just does. And when it happens, that's when you have an elite player. Like even Joe Burrow. I mean, he wasn't supposed to be let alone a first round draft pick. He wasn't supposed to be the top pick of the draft.
Burrow's another great example of a guy. It's most people didn't even know who he was or had like a 5th or 4th round grade on him. And like you said, it's very rare to have a guy. I mean, Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck, Trevor Lawrence. There's very few guys who are consensus number 1 overall picks, from an early time and keep that status. So it's always an adventure. It's a good way, especially to, as a Chiefs fan growing up, we didn't win a lot of games. That obviously has changed now, but the draft was kind of was always my, I was like, all right, we lost a game, better draft pick. Let's see.
That's right. Week. That's how I am with the Jets. Hopefully I won't be like that much longer. I think I finally got not only the right GM, but the right head coach now. So and hopefully the right quarterback. Isn't it interesting that everybody keeps, and I hate hearing it. They talk about Zach Wilson. They'll go, oh, it's sort of like Patrick Mahomes, and he does these things like Patrick. Oh, I don't want to hear that. Don't say that. Don't put that on the kid.
Yeah, that's a tough. That's a tough one to be compared to.
No, you don't want to do that. All right. Again, great job as always, Tom. Appreciate it, and we'll talk to you again before the season begins.
All right. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you.